3 o'clock. HR will handle it. Clean exit? Luke Harrow's voice slid through the glass conference room like it owned the air. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was walking past, holding a compliance binder no one ever read, when his reflection caught mine. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. His eyes flicked toward my row of desks, paused, then moved on. Already done with me. Before I tell you what happens next, I'd really like to know what the temperature is where you live right now. And if you're still listening, please leave your lucky number as a friendly greeting. I'm Willa Hayes, Senior Compliance Lead. The person this company forgets exists until regulators start asking uncomfortable questions. I don't generate revenue. I prevent disasters. I make sure filings match reality. That shortcuts stay imaginary. That speed doesn't turn into a federal problem. That makes me invisible. Or inconvenient. Luke Harrow arrived 6 months ago as the new Chief Operating Officer, carrying a resume packed with upward-sloping charts and glossy language. Speed, scale, efficiency. He said them like commandments. He said them while cutting corners he didn't understand. To him. Regulations were friction, to me. They were the only reason we were still in business. I walked back to my desk without changing my pace. Panic is loud. I wasn't ready to be loud. Around me, keyboards clicked, phones buzzed, people laughed. No one noticed the quiet math running in my head. 3 o'clock meant a meeting invite without a subject. HR in the room. Carefully chosen language. A decision framed as progress. I sat down and opened my inbox. No new messages. Of course not. Decisions like this are made in rooms with glass walls and selective hearing. I finished reviewing a compliance checklist that would never be thanked. Saved it. Then reached into a folder I hadn't touched in weeks. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't encrypted. It didn't need to be. The name alone explained everything. If Luke pushes too far, I clicked it open and stayed still. From that moment on. The story is no longer simple, and what follows contains fictional elements and is I assisted to highlight the humanistic message and emotional experience. Hopefully, you'll find something for yourself. If not, take good care of yourself, and we'll see each other again later. I stopped expecting answers after the third unanswered email. Then I realized he wasn't reading them at all. Each message followed the same structure: documented risk, cited regulation, suggested correction. Each reply, when it came, was thinner, colder, and clearly written by someone who hadn't opened the attachment. When I finally cornered him after an operations meeting, he smiled the way executives do when they're done listening. "We're not lying," Luke said. "We're being flexible." The room laughed lightly. Relieved, I stood there holding proof that flexibility was just another word for falsification. The labels came quickly after that. Difficult, rigid, not aligned with the new culture. I was told I focused too much on rules and not enough on momentum. A director suggested I pick my battles. Another asked if I still enjoyed working here. No one asked whether the filings were accurate. Weeks blurred into a pattern of quiet resistance. I kept documenting. I kept sending warnings. I kept watching problems get renamed instead of fixed. Each ignored email felt heavier than the last, like a record being written for someone else to read later. Then the calendar alert appeared. Career alignment, 3 p.m. No explanation followed. At 2:45, nothing about the office had changed. Phones rang, keyboards clicked, and someone down the row reheated coffee that already smelled burned. I stayed where I was, reading a compliance log as if the next 15 minutes didn't matter. Panic wastes time. Professionals don't panic. I finished one last review, corrected a reference number, and saved the file. Then I saved it again to a personal archive I'd built quietly over months. Not because I was dramatic, but because patterns repeat. Companies cut corners, executives deny it, and someone eventually needs proof. I had learned to be that someone. My laptop closed with a soft click. I didn't rush. I slid my badge into my pocket, stacked the papers on my desk, and stood when the clock in the corner of my screen turned. Standing early looks guilty. Standing late looks desperate. Timing, like compliance, is about precision. Around me. No one said a word. They didn't know what had been decided upstairs. But they sensed something. People always do? I caught a few glances, quickly redirected. As if eye contact itself might become evidence, I adjusted my jacket and walked toward the aisle. Calm settling in where anger should have been. That calm wasn't confidence, it was containment. Years of watching problems ignored had taught me how to seal emotion behind procedure. Whatever happened at 3 o'clock would follow a script I'd seen before. HR language, neutral expressions, a decision framed as alignment. I took 3 steps from my desk when the sound cut through the floor. A sharp, mechanical whir. Then another. The security badge printer at the front lobby. Once is routine, twice is coincidence, 3 times means visitors. I slowed without stopping. Through the glass. I saw the receptionist stiffen, her hand already reaching for the phone. The machine chirped again. Relentless. My pulse stayed steady. But something else clicked into place. This wasn't part of Luke's schedule. Whatever was arriving had its own authority. And I understood then that staying calm was the most dangerous response I could possibly choose in that moment. People like to believe chaos announces itself. It doesn't. It walks in calmly, wearing press suits and practiced expressions, and waits for someone to notice. The 3 of them stopped just inside the lobby. Black suits, neutral faces, posture too balanced to belong to salespeople. 1 woman, 2 men. The receptionist looked up, confused, then stiffened as credentials appeared. I couldn't see the details from where I stood, but I recognized the weight of the moment instantly. One of them scanned the room and asked, clearly and without hesitation, "Is Willa Hayes available right now?" The question landed harder than any accusation. Conversations stalled. A printer down the hall kept running. Oblivious. I stepped forward before anyone else could answer, my voice steady when I said yes. From the corner of the floor, Luke Harrow saw them. I watched recognition crawl across his face in real time. The confident smile he wore in meetings didn't fade dramatically. It simply shut off, like a switch flipped by someone else's hand. "We're federal investigators," the woman said, lowering her voice as she handed the receptionist a card. "We need a few minutes with Ms. Hayes." No one objected. No one ever does when authority enters without asking permission. As we walked, she fell into step beside me, close enough that only I could hear her next words. "This isn't about your meeting at 3. I didn't respond. "I didn't need to," she continued, quiet and precise. "This is about falsified federal filings, reports that don't match underlying documentation." The hallway felt suddenly narrower. Every ignored email, every overridden warning rearranged itself into something larger, sharper. I understood then why they had come to me first. Not because I was important, but because I had been inconvenient. Behind us, Luke was already moving, phone in hand, urgency replacing authority. Ahead of me, the investigators didn't slow. They didn't need to. The story had already changed direction, and in that moment, I realized the firing I feared had quietly transformed into leverage I never expected, carrying consequences far beyond this building and its leadership. I didn't volunteer the truth at first. They asked the right question and waited. The woman across the table folded her hands and said, "Why you?" The answer had been sitting in my chest for months, heavy and precise. "I was scheduled to be fired today." I said, 3 p.m., HR in the room. No drama, just facts. One of the men stopped writing. The other looked up. Silence recalibrated the space. I continued before doubt could creep in. The reason was simple. I refused to sign filings I knew were inaccurate. I explained the chain without embellishment. Drafts altered after review. Attachments removed. Deadlines weaponized. When I objected, the language softened while the pressure hardened. Be flexible, be aligned, be quiet. I wasn't any of those things. I kept records. I asked for corrections. I declined to certify what hadn't been done. The woman nodded once. "You documented this?" she asked. "Yes." I said, "Every instance, Dates, versions, approvals. I told them where the emails lived, how the logs conflicted, how my name was used until it became inconvenient. The room shifted again, like a verdict forming without a gavel. From the hallway, Luke's voice rose and fell, contained but urgent. Phones moved, doors closed. Inside, the investigators exchanged a look that didn't need translation. The question wasn't whether a termination was planned. It was whether it could still happen. Termination now would be retaliation, the woman said. Calm as a checklist, under federal law. She let that sentence settle, then added, and retaliation expands our authority. I felt the balance tilt. The meeting at 3 lost its meaning. What mattered was the record, the refusal, the timing. I hadn't set a trap. I'd simply stayed in the open long enough for the rules to arrive. When they did, the story inverted, and the exit Luke had planned for me quietly closed behind him. In that reversal, fear drained away, replaced by clarity, patience, and a certainty that compliance, when documented and timed correctly, doesn't beg for mercy, it invokes consequences. And consequences tend to answer faster than threats. If you believe refusing to sign false records and choosing documentation over silence was the right move, leave a 3 in the comments. Your voice matters. Because speaking up is often the first step that turns quiet integrity into real accountability. I could hear Luke before I saw him. His voice carried that brittle confidence executives use when they think volume can bend facts. He stepped into the room smiling, palms open, already framing the story. This is a miscommunication, he said. Processes moved fast, lines crossed, no intent. He kept talking while dialing his phone, turning away just long enough to say, "Get me counsel, now." The investigators didn't interrupt. They let him build momentum, the way you let someone finish tightening a knot they can't untie. Luke gestured toward me. "She's talented," he added, "generous and false, but she's rigid. She misunderstood drafts." He looked relieved, as if the word misunderstanding could erase months. I answered with dates. I named threads, versions, approvals. I described what was sent, what was returned, and what changed after review. The table filled with quiet taps as notes were taken. Luke tried again. "Emails get messy," he said. "People forward things. Attachments change." His lawyer's voice crackled through the phone, urgent and muffled. The woman investigator asked for the first message, then the second, then the one that followed. Time lined them up. Headers matched clocks. Signatures matched accounts. The story stopped breathing. Luke stared at the screen, then at me, then back to the screen, as if repetition might produce mercy. "This doesn't align," she said. "Neutral as math. The certification bears your signature. The underlying record doesn't." Luke swallowed. "I didn't sign that," he said. She slid the printout closer. "You authorized the workflow," she replied. "At 9:12. His resistance turned frantic. He paced, whispered into the phone, promised explanations that hadn't been written yet. I stayed still. Desperation makes noise. Evidence doesn't. When the room finally went quiet, the decision arrived without drama. "We're seizing system access," the investigator said. "Effective immediately." She stood. "Servers, logs, internal email," Luke protested, but the words landed after the action. Laptops closed, credentials were requested. The pushback collapsed into procedure. And procedure, once started, does not negotiate. From that moment, control shifted, irreversible, documented, and colder than any threat he imagined possible. At 4:05, the office exhaled without realizing it. The calendar invite disappeared from my screen, replaced by nothing at all. No apology, no explanation, just absence. A minute earlier, HR had been rehearsing language. Now they were silent. An email arrived, clipped and careful. "The meeting scheduled for this afternoon is canceled. Further guidance will follow." I didn't open it right away. I watched Luke Harrow instead. He stood at the end of the hallway, arguing in a low voice with someone who wasn't interested in being persuaded. His hands moved the way they always did when he thought authority could be negotiated. It couldn't. One of the investigators gestured toward the conference room door. Not angrily, not loudly, just decisively. Luke was asked to step out. The phrase sounded polite, almost generous. He looked around, searching for support that didn't exist anymore. No one met his eyes. He straightened his jacket, trying to keep dignity intact as it slipped through procedural fingers. Inside the room, the temperature changed, phones stopped buzzing, conversations ended mid-sentence. Justice doesn't announce itself, it reorders priorities. Someone from HR hovered near my desk, pale and unsure, then retreated without speaking. The lead investigator spoke again, this time for the record. The scope had expanded. Obstruction, falsification, potential retaliation. Each word landed heavier than the last, not because of volume, but because of inevitability. Luke's decisions had crossed from aggressive management into federal interest. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief. Recognition. This was the moment my warnings had been waiting for. The point where documentation outweighed narrative. What Luke framed as efficiency now read as intent. By the time he was escorted down the hall, his phone had gone quiet. Lawyers don't argue with sealed systems. HR doesn't argue with statutes. At 4:05, the firing ended. The investigation began, and for the first time all day, the imbalance corrected itself. I stayed seated, hands folded, aware that silence was no longer weakness but record, and that from this point forward, every action would be measured, preserved, and weighed by people who answered only to law, instead of convenience, loyalty, or fear, that once protected him alone previously. The collapse didn't arrive as a single blow, it moved outward, desk by desk, conversation by conversation. Once Luke was removed from the room, people started talking, quietly at first, then with urgency. Managers who had echoed his directives now asked for clarification. Others asked for protection. Investigators split the floor into interviews. Names I recognized were called, then recalled. The same explanations repeated until they frayed. I was told it was approved. I assumed compliance had signed off. Each sentence ended the same way, pointing upward to a decision that no longer shielded them. What surfaced wasn't one mistake, but a system built to absorb silence. Training records mismatched rosters, logs referenced audits that never occurred. Approvals existed without reviews. The compliance framework I'd warned about wasn't broken. It had been hollowed out. Speed had replaced verification, and everyone knew who demanded it. By late afternoon, the tone shifted again. Cooperation replaced defensiveness. Files were offered instead of requested. Emails forwarded without prompting. The story gained weight as fragments aligned. I watched managers realize that aligning with Luke hadn't protected them. It had recorded them. Someone asked me if I was satisfied. The question missed the point. This wasn't vindication, it was consequence, unfolding exactly as regulations predicted when ignored long enough. Near the end of the day, the announcement came quietly. Luke Harrow was placed on administrative suspension, effective immediately. Access revoked, authority paused. The words traveled faster than any memo he'd ever sent. No one celebrated. Collapse isn't dramatic when it's procedural, it's methodical, unemotional, and final. As the chain reaction slowed, I understood that the company wasn't reacting to me anymore. It was responding to law, and law, unlike leadership trends, does not pivot. It records, it escalates, and once triggered, it keeps moving forward. I remained at my desk, answering questions only when asked, aware that every reply became part of the record. The collapse continued after hours, into inboxes, calendars, and access lists, proving that decisions don't end when meetings do. They echo through systems long after the voices stop. That realization settled slowly, leaving no doubt about what accountability truly costs for everyone. By the next morning, the tone had changed. The board asked to meet. not in the large room Luke favored, but in a smaller one with fewer chairs and no slogans on the wall. Their opening line was simple. "We need you to lead the remediation," the chair said. Careful, measured, suddenly respectful. I listened without interrupting. They spoke about continuity, confidence, and regulators who no longer trusted promises. When they finished, I answered just as simply. "I'll do it," I said. "Under conditions." Silence followed. Power reveals itself in pauses. I named the first condition veto authority over any operational decision touching compliance. No exceptions, no escalations. If I said no, the answer was no. The second condition followed direct reporting to the board. Quarterly, unfiltered. No intermediaries, no narrative edits. A director shifted. "That's unusual." He said. I met his eyes. "So was falsifying filings." I replied. No one argued. They asked about title, compensation, optics. I waved it away. Titles won't fix this. I said, access will. What they needed wasn't a promotion announcement. They needed insulation from their own momentum. They needed someone whose refusal carried weight. The chair nodded slowly. "You'll have our backing," she said. I asked for it in writing, then asked for access lists, audit authority, and hiring control. Each request landed, was discussed, then approved, not because I demanded it loudly, but because the alternative had already proven costly. As the meeting ended, one director said quietly, "We should have listened sooner." I didn't correct him. Listening hadn't been the issue. Protection had. I left the room without a new badge or office. I didn't need either. The leverage was procedural, not personal. They hadn't elevated me. They had acknowledged reality, and in that acknowledgement, the balance settled. They didn't give me power. They recognized they already depended on it. Quiet authority works because it protects outcomes, not egos. And once the board understood that difference, urgency replaced ceremony, promises became policies, and my silence finally meant safety for everyone who would be judged by what followed after the investigation ended. I never raised my voice, not once. Justice didn't require it. Weeks later, the notice arrived confirming what procedure had already decided. Luke Harrow was charged, not for arrogance or poor leadership, but for obstruction and falsification. Words that don't argue, only conclude. The company survived, under federal monitoring that touched every report, every approval, every decision. Audits replaced meetings, statutes replaced slogans. Speed was no longer admired. Accuracy was enforced. I stayed where I had always been. Inside the work, no victory speech, no interviews, no satisfaction borrowed from humiliation. The outcome was enough. People asked if I felt vindicated. I didn't. Vindication is emotional. This was structural. A correction applied where it belonged. I closed my files knowing the record would outlast opinions. And when someone asked what I did to Luke Harrow, my answer stayed simple. I didn't destroy Luke Harrow. I just stopped shielding his lies. There's a lesson in this story that has nothing to do with winning and everything to do with how you stand when it's easier to disappear. I didn't fight back with anger. I didn't threaten anyone. I did something quieter and harder. I documented the truth, even when it made me unpopular, even when it put a target on my back. That choice cost me comfort in the short term, but it protected my integrity in the long term. What stayed with me most wasn't the investigation or the outcome. It was the moment I realized how many people stay silent because they think they're alone. They think speaking up won't matter. They think the system is too big. But systems are built on records, actions, and timing, and those are things ordinary people control more than they realize. So let me ask you this: if you were in that position, knowing the risk, knowing the pressure, what would you do? Would you sign and move on? Or would you slow down and leave a trail that tells the truth? I'm curious, where are you listening from right now? Different places, different laws, but the same human choices. If this story resonated with you, your support matters more than you think. One comment can start a conversation. One like tells the algorithm this story should reach someone else who feels powerless. One subscription helps keep these stories visible for people who need them. By subscribing, liking, and sharing, you're not just supporting a channel, you're helping this message reach someone who might need the courage to do the right thing tomorrow. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.